Seems like one Mototec was not enough. It's never enough, am I right? It's a roller right now, but let's see what it'll take to make this thing rideable. So if you saw the last video with the Mototec, and if you haven't, I highly recommend that you do, you would have seen that in a last-ditch effort to fix the far driver controller that we put in this bike, we decided to actually remove that far driver controller entirely and replace it with something better. Enter this bike. Seemingly out of nowhere, I was able to find this thing locally on OfferUp with an ETM kit inside and a slight case of the no workies. So before we completely gut this thing and put all of its components in the original bike, why not just get it restored and up and running as it sits? We can see what it'll take to fix it and how much money I'll need to throw at it, because I got this for a really good deal and I think I might have struck electric gold here. So let's take a look at this bike in the round and see what we're dealing with here. It is a Mototec. There's not many changes between all the different Mototecs, so it's very similar to what we've seen. You can see that this one was very used and abused. There's not one piece of plastic trim anywhere that isn't heavily scratched or heavily slung with mud. So you can tell just from the state that this bike is in, which is exactly the state that I got it, that this thing was very heavily used. And not only that, but it was heavily modified, because we can see the evidence of the ETM kit right here on the handlebars. You got the full twist throttle with the 3-position switch, the voltmeter, and the on and off kill switch, all of which come with the ETM kit. We can also see some other evidence of modifications, and probably hasty modifications would be my guess. With the brakes right here, there's one here for the rear and one for the front here. And as you can see, they're clearly different. And with this rear one in particular, it was clearly for something a lot bigger, because as you can see right here, there's a lot of slack going on here. Not only that, but then they kind of routed it in a really weird manner. So rather than just going through the hole here like everything else, they decided to punch a hole right here in the plastic and then go straight down through the controller area through there. So we'll take a look at all of the components of the ETM kit that are inside here in a little bit, but one piece you can see for sure is the motor right here, and this is where the problem lies on this bike. What makes it a roller is that this motor, to put it lightly, is it's not connected to anything. So let's talk cost. I bought this bike as is for $400. And considering the fact that the Electro Co ETM kit retails for $650, I am pretty well ahead. Not to mention the fact that once I remove the Electro Co ETM kit out of this bike, I still have a bike that's basically for free. And the news keeps getting better, because even though this is a pretty rough shape at the moment, it does have a lot of working components. So as you can see here, we're gonna turn this on, flip the kill switch, and you can see that the voltmeter works and that it's holding voltage. But then we can see more clearly what the issue is. So now that it's on, it's got voltage, we can hit the throttle and everything works. So the controller is doing its job. It's just the issue is down here. So you can see right there, or probably can't, at least what's missing. There's no sprocket on there. It's just kind of spinning on its own. So let's see what it'll take to get that to connect to that, to make that spin, and that go that way. That's how bikes work. So clearly, as you saw there, the issue lies with the motor. However, the way that the front sprocket is attached to the motor is just with a bolt that simply threads into the shaft. So because of that, I think I have one of two scenarios here. First scenario is that the bolt is just missing, and that's where the front sprocket and the chain went with it. And maybe I can just simply replace the bolt and sprocket, put it together, and be on my merry way. Or the second option is that that shaft has been damaged in addition, or maybe so much so that the bolt fell out, in which case I need a new motor entirely. Two very different fixes and two very different costs, so I'm really hoping it's the former. But to know for sure, we gotta get that motor out of there and see what we're working with. All right, so let's see what we're dealing with. It may be a little hard to see on camera, but right there is where it's threaded into the shaft. And it might be even harder to see, but there is some threads in there that we can see. Doesn't look the cleanest. However, I can also kind of see, where the camera might not, that inside there's no broken bolt or anything that's snapped, so I don't have to go extracting anything. That's a plus. And I know from reading online that the bolt that threads into this is an M5 by 0.8. And I have one right here, so let's actually just try it as it is and see if I can't thread this thing in. Not quite, so it went in like maybe half a turn, if anything, and not going any further. So let me try something here. So here I have my tried and true tap and die set. So you can see this is a thread chaser, and it's like a glorified bolt, but it has these little channels in here to allow for some space, so that way when you're actually moving it around in there and it cuts the threads and cleans everything up, it has somewhere to put that debris, so we can theoretically clean this thing up and get it such that we can actually thread a bolt in there. Occasionally I hit a rough spot where the whole shaft just spins and there's not really anything to clamp down on there. I don't want to tear it up either, so I'm just kind of moving it a little bit at a time, wiggling it just enough so that it gets past that rough spot, and then we can keep going. There we go. Yes. Oh, look at that. It went all the way in there. Score. Let's see what that does to it. Oh, look at that. That's beautiful. Yes, that threads all the way in. Oh, that's good news. Well, immediately scratch all of that. It's a lot worse than I thought. So once I got this thing threaded on, I was really excited that this is gonna work, and it was gonna be cheap too, because a new front sprocket is only a couple of bucks and I have the bolt already. But then I was thinking, well, I already have a second Mototec, so why don't I just kind of pilfer this front sprocket, put it on this one, and see that I can get this thing fully functional again. However, once I took off the motor from the other Mototec and compared the two, I started to notice a few things. So this is a perfect front sprocket and shaft, and you can see there that it's got a very distinct kind of squared ovally shape that the sprocket squeezes onto, and it's actually really on there. I wasn't even able to just pull this thing off. And then the bolt sits on top with a washer to keep it in place. But when we go to our Electro Co motor, you can see where the issue lies. On top of that, it's pretty flush. What happened here was either by not properly torquing the bolt or not properly fitting the front sprocket, for whatever reason, it sheared the whole thing off with the front sprocket. So now I'm starting to see why this guy didn't just fix this thing with a new front sprocket. Yeah, it's not the ideal scenario here. I was hoping for a $10 fix, but now it's looking like it's gonna be a $200 fix. But even so, I still only paid $400 for this, so now with the new motor, I'll be in it for $600, which is still under the price of the ETM kit. So I am going to go order one of those and jump cut. Oh look, a new ETM motor. That was fast, and definitely not a week later. But first we gotta go back in time just a little bit to do some much needed cleanup. Well, since we gotta wait for that motor to finish everything, might as well just gut this thing further and get it cleaned up, so that way when we have the motor, we can put everything back together and it'll look a little more presentable. But back to the present. As you're watching this though, it's the past. YouTube is such a weird timeline. And I have all the components from the ETM kit also cleaned up. They were very dirty and definitely needed some cleaning. So now that I have everything here, might as well just bench test everything right here as it sits to make sure that everything works perfectly before we go throwing it back into the bike. Jesus Christ, what is going on here? What's going on there is a motor that's not properly communicating to the controller, or that it's actually just lost in translation. This confused me a little bit at first, but then I reached out to Electro Co and they assured me that it's just a retune that's needed. Basically, the tune on this is so old that the motor is used to something newer and I just need an update, easy enough. So presumably I'm gonna be sending this unit out to Electro Co, but rather than just have everything else just sit here on the bench and just wait to go in what is now truly a roller, I figured that I would just actually make the old bike the roller. I'm going to gut all of the stock components out of that, put it in the new roller, and then I will have a new, fully functional stock Mototec.
It's a Mototec restoration. Let's fix this roller, then rob the controller. Step 2 is to flip it. Step 3, profit. It gets stock parts, then we'll see if it starts. It's a Mototec restoration.
Well, it's not exactly new looking, but performance-wise, feels just like I unboxed it.
Who would have thought? I started this video out with a working bike and a roller, and now I have a working bike and a roller. But rest assured, we will have 2 working bikes very soon. As I record this, both the controller and the motor are making their way up to Electro Co. But also, as I record this, it's Thanksgiving week, so I'm not expecting it anytime soon. So we will have to wait for the install and the first ride with the ETM kit in the next video. And so you don't forget about that video, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Every click helps. But we gotta tally up the costs. And for the sake of argument, we're just gonna assume that the ETM kit that's currently getting retuned is gonna be perfectly fine when it comes back. Nothing else else needed on that front. So the bike itself, of course, as I mentioned earlier, this was $400, and the ETM motor, like I also mentioned, that was another $200. And that was all that was needed to actually just make it functional and rideable. Thankfully, the bike, when I got it, it came with a chain, so I didn't have to get one of those. However, because we ripped out the ETM kit, the full twist throttle and the grips had to go with it. This half throttle wasn't gonna work with any other grips, so I actually got some brand new Mototec stock grips from them directly. It was $7 for those. And I also noticed that a couple of brackets were missing when it came to this front shroud. Without them, they would just be flopping around and probably break if I were to drop the bike. So I got a couple of those. They were $3 each. So for $610, I have this. And even in stock trim, that is a pretty good deal. That's almost exactly half off from retail. But that's not even counting that on top of this fully functional stock bike, I also have a full ETM kit from Electro Co on the way. So I'm gonna count that as getting a serious upgrade for the other bike, basically for free. That just leaves us with one question. Anyone wanna buy Mototec?
Fix this roller, then rob the controller. Step 2 is to flip it. Step 3, profit. It gets stock parts, then we'll see if it starts. It's a Mototec restoration.